The morning air was cold and thick with fog as Jake pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders. He had been walking for almost 2 hours now, and his boots were getting heavy with mud from the wet ground. The village around him looked like a ghost town. Broken windows stared back at him like empty eyes, and weeds grew through cracks in the road. This wasn't how Jake had imagined his life would turn out. 3 years ago, he was working at his father's garage, fixing cars and planning his future. Now he carried a rifle and wore a uniform that felt too big for him most days. The war had changed everything. It divided their country into two sides, and suddenly people who used to be neighbors became enemies. Jake stopped and checked his radio. The crackling voice of his captain came through clearly. Team 3, report your position. Jake pressed the button and spoke into the small device. We're at the old market square, sir. Everything looks quiet here, but quiet didn't mean safe. Jake had learned that lesson the hard way. He looked back at his team. There was Tom, a guy about his age who used to work at the post office. Tom was always nervous, always checking corners twice. Then there was Officer Rodriguez, an older man who had been doing this job for 15 years. Rodriguez never seemed scared of anything, but Jake could see the tiredness in his eyes. The fog was starting to lift as the sun climbed higher. Jake could see more of the village now. Most of the houses were empty, their doors hanging open like broken teeth. Some had holes in their walls from explosions. Others just looked sad and forgotten, with clothes still hanging on lines that no one would ever collect. Jake remembered when this place used to be busy. His grandmother had brought him here as a child to buy fresh bread and vegetables. The baker would always give him a free cookie, and the old woman who sold flowers would pinch his cheek and tell him he was getting taller. Now the bakery had no roof, and weeds grew where the flower stand used to be. Stay sharp, everyone, Rodriguez called out softly. Intelligence says there might be movement in this area. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Intelligence was often wrong, but when they were right, it usually meant trouble. He adjusted his grip on his rifle and tried to push away the memories of the last time they had encountered the enemy. It had been 3 weeks ago, in a village much like this one. Jake's friend Danny had been walking just 10 feet ahead when the shot came from nowhere. Danny fell, and by the time they got him to safety, it was too late. Jake still had nightmares about it. In his dreams, he could have moved faster, could have seen the danger coming. But dreams don't change what really happened. The team moved slowly through the empty streets. Their footsteps echoed off the broken buildings, making Jake feel like everyone in the world could hear them coming. He tried to step more quietly, but his boots seemed to find every loose stone and puddle. Tom pointed to a house at the end of the street. It was bigger than the others and still had glass in most of its windows. That one looks different, he whispered. Jake looked where Tom was pointing and felt something cold crawl up his spine. There was definitely something different about that house. While all the others looked dead and empty, this one seemed to be watching them. Rodriguez nodded and made hand signals that meant they should spread out and approach carefully. Jake's heart started beating faster. This was the part of the job he hated most. The waiting, the not knowing what was coming next. His mouth felt dry, and he wished he had drunk more water at breakfast. As they got closer to the house, Jake could see that someone had recently walked through the mud near the front door. The footprints were small, probably from a woman or child. But that didn't make him feel better. The enemy often used women and children to set traps. Jake had seen it happen before, and the memory made his hands shake slightly. The wind picked up and rattled the loose shutters on nearby houses. The sound made everyone jump a little. Jake forced himself to breathe slowly and focus. His training kicked in, and he started checking all the windows and doorways for any sign of movement. Rodriguez held up his hand, telling everyone to stop. They were about 50 feet from the house now. Jake could see a garden behind it where someone had once grown vegetables. The plants were all dead now, brown and twisted from lack of care. But someone had walked through that garden recently too. I'm seeing fresh tracks, Rodriguez whispered into his radio, requesting backup. Jake felt both relieved and more nervous at the same time. Backup meant they would have help if things went wrong. But it also meant their captain thought this situation was dangerous enough to need extra people. Jake found cover behind an old car that had been abandoned in the street. The car was missing its tires and had bullet holes in the side, but it was better than standing in the open. He checked his rifle again, making sure the safety was off and a round was ready to fire. His grandfather had taught him to shoot when he was 12, but shooting at bottles and cans was very different from what he might have to do now. The minutes felt like hours as they waited for backup to arrive. Jake watched the house carefully, looking for any movement behind the windows. Once, he thought he saw a shadow move across one of the rooms, but it might have been his imagination. His eyes were starting to water from staring so hard. Tom was positioned behind a broken wall about 20 feet to Jake's left. Jake could see that Tom's hands were shaking as he held his rifle. This was only Tom's second month on patrol, and Jake remembered how scary everything had seemed when he was new too. The first time Jake had to point his weapon at another person, he had thrown up afterward. No one talked about things like that, but Jake knew he wasn't the only one. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio again. Backup is 5 minutes out. Everyone hold position and stay alert. 5 minutes felt like a very long time when you were crouched behind a car, watching a house that might contain people who wanted to hurt you. Jake thought about his family back home. His mother would be making breakfast right now, probably worried about him like she was every day. She had cried when he got called up for service, but she was also proud. His little sister had made him promise to come home safe, and he intended to keep that promise. The fog was almost completely gone now, and Jake could see the house clearly. It was painted blue once, but most of the paint had peeled away. There was a small porch with 2 chairs that looked like someone had been sitting in them recently. Jake wondered who had lived there before the war, and whether they had been happy. Suddenly, Rodriguez raised his hand again. This time his signal meant that he had seen something important. Jake strained his eyes to look where Rodriguez was pointing, and his heart jumped. There was definitely someone moving inside the house. Jake's finger moved closer to the trigger of his rifle. His training told him to be ready for anything, but his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The movement inside the house had stopped, but he knew someone was definitely in there. Rodriguez held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. It was time to move. "This is Border Patrol," Rodriguez called out in a loud, clear voice. "Come out with your hands visible. We know you're in there." The words echoed off the empty buildings around them, making the whole street feel even more lonely and dangerous. For a moment, nothing happened. Jake could hear his own breathing and the sound of wind blowing through broken windows. Then came the noise of footsteps inside the house. Someone was moving around quickly, like they were looking for something or trying to hide. Jake adjusted his position behind the old car. His knees were starting to hurt from crouching for so long, but he didn't dare move. Tom was still behind the broken wall, and Jake could see sweat on his face even though the morning was cold. Rodriguez had taken cover behind a thick tree and was watching the front door of the house. "You have 30 seconds to come out," Rodriguez shouted again. "After that, we're coming in." Jake hoped whoever was inside would just surrender. Going into a building was always the most dangerous part of their job. Too many places for someone to hide. Too many corners where trouble could be waiting. The footsteps inside got faster and more frantic. Jake heard something fall over, maybe a chair or table. Then came a sound that made his stomach drop. A woman's voice, crying and saying something in the language spoken on the other side of the border. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the fear and desperation in her voice. Rodriguez looked at Jake and Tom, then made the hand signal that meant they should get ready to enter the building. Jake's mouth went completely dry. He had hoped this would end peacefully, but it looked like they were going to have to go in after all. Before anyone could move, the front door of the house suddenly opened. Jake raised his rifle and aimed at the doorway, just like he had been trained to do. A figure appeared in the shadows of the doorway. Definitely a woman, wearing a long dark coat that looked old and worn out. "Don't move," Jake called out, his voice sounding strange and tight. The woman stepped out of the doorway with her hands up, but she was moving in a way that made Jake nervous. She kept looking back at the house and talking rapidly in her own language. Her hands were shaking and tears were running down her face. Jake could see her more clearly now. She was probably around 30 years old, with dark hair that hadn't been washed in several days. Her clothes were dirty and torn in places, like she had been traveling for a long time. But what worried Jake most was the way she kept trying to move forward, even with 3 rifles pointed at her. "Stay right where you are," Rodriguez commanded. But the woman didn't seem to understand or didn't care. She took another step toward them, still crying and speaking words they couldn't understand. Jake's finger was right on the trigger now. Everything in his training told him this could be a trick, a way to get him to lower their guard. Then the woman switched to English, though her accent was thick and her words came out broken and desperate. "Please," she said, "please don't shoot. My mother is dying." She pointed back at the house with one shaking hand while keeping the other one raised. "She need help. Please, I only want help for my mother." Jake felt something twist in his stomach. The woman's voice reminded him of his own mother, the way she sounded when she was really scared or worried about something. But he also remembered his training. The enemy had used family members as covers for attacks before. Children, grandparents, anyone who might make soldiers hesitate. "Stop right there," Jake shouted, but his voice cracked slightly. The woman was only about 20 feet away from him now, close enough that he could see her face clearly. There was dirt on her cheeks mixed with tears, and her eyes looked like she hadn't slept in days. Rodriguez was talking into his radio, probably asking for instructions from their captain. Tom was still aiming his rifle at the woman, but Jake could see that his hands were shaking even more than before. None of them had expected this situation. The woman tried to take another step forward, and all 3 soldiers shouted, "Stop!" at the same time. She froze but kept talking in English, mixed with her own language. "My mother, she is very sick. I walked 3 days to find medicine. Please, I'm not dangerous. I just daughter trying to save mother." Jake's mind was racing. He wanted to believe her, but believing the wrong person could get his whole team killed. He had seen what happened to soldiers who trusted too easily. At the same time, what if she was telling the truth? What if there really was a sick old woman in that house who needed help? "Where is this mother?" Rodriguez called out. The woman pointed to the house again, more frantically this time. "Inside, she cannot walk, very sick, very weak. I leave her to find medicine, but medicine is only on your side of border." Jake looked at the house more carefully. He could see a window on the side where a curtain was hanging, and he thought he saw it move slightly. Either someone else was in there, or it was just the wind. He couldn't tell which, and that made him even more nervous. The woman must have seen him looking at the house because she started talking faster. "She is my only family. My father died in war 2 years ago. My brother also died. Only my mother left, and now she is dying too. I cannot let her die. Please understand." Something in her voice made Jake's chest feel tight. He thought about his own grandmother, who had raised him after his father left. She had gotten sick last winter, and Jake remembered how helpless he had felt, how he would have done anything to make her better. But his grandmother had access to doctors and medicine. This woman was from the other side of the border, where medical supplies were hard to find. Rodriguez was still waiting for orders on his radio, but Jake could tell he was getting impatient. Standard procedure was to detain anyone crossing the border illegally and sort out their story later. But something about this situation felt different. The woman seemed to sense that time was running out. She slowly reached into her coat pocket, and all 3 soldiers tensed up immediately. "Hands where we can see them," Rodriguez commanded. The woman pulled her hand out very carefully, and Jake could see she was holding a small piece of paper. "This is prescription," she said, holding the paper out toward them. "From doctor in my village. Shows what medicine my mother needs. Please, you can see I tell truth." Her voice was getting weaker, like she was running out of hope. Jake lowered his rifle just a tiny bit, not enough for anyone to notice, but enough that his arms could relax slightly. He found himself wanting to believe this woman, wanting her story to be true. But wanting something and knowing it for sure were 2 very different things. The morning sun was getting brighter, and as the woman stepped closer, Jake could see her face more clearly. Something about her seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. Maybe it was just the stress of the situation making his mind play tricks on him. He kept his rifle steady, but doubt was creeping into his thoughts. Rodriguez was still waiting for backup and orders from headquarters. The radio crackled with static, but no clear instructions came through. Jake could see that his team leader was getting frustrated. They had protocols to follow, but this situation wasn't like anything in their training manual. "Please," the woman said again, taking one small step forward. "Look at paper. You will see I tell truth about my mother." She was still holding the prescription out toward them, and Jake could see her hand trembling. Whether it was from fear or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. Tom shifted his position behind the wall, and Jake heard him whisper something under his breath. Probably a prayer. Tom did that sometimes when things got tense. Jake wished he had that kind of faith, something to hold on to when everything felt uncertain. The woman's eyes met Jake's directly, and something electric shot through him. Those eyes, he had seen them before, somewhere, sometime, but where? The feeling was like trying to remember a dream that was slipping away even as you reached for it. "I know you think I am enemy," the woman continued, her English getting a little clearer as she calmed down slightly. "But I'm just person, like you. I have family I love, like you probably do. My mother, she raised me alone after my father died in factory accident when I was small girl." Jake's chest tightened. His own father had died in an accident at work. When Jake was 15, a crane had fallen at the construction site, and Jake's world had changed forever. He remembered how his mother had cried for weeks, and how scared he had been about their future. "Before war started," the woman went on, "I work as teacher in school. I teach children to read and write. I never hurt anyone in my whole life. I never even kill a spider in my house because I think all life is precious." Rodriguez made a hand signal telling Jake and Tom to stay alert, but Jake could see that even their hardened team leader was affected by the woman's words. This wasn't what any of them had expected when they started their patrol this morning. The woman took another small step, and this time none of them shouted at her to stop. "My mother, she teach me to be kind to people, even when they are different from us. She say that before war, people from your side and people from my side, we shop in same markets, our children play together." Jake suddenly remembered something his grandmother had told him. Before the borders closed, she used to visit a market on the other side every month. She would buy special spices and fabrics that weren't available on their side. She had friends there, people she had known for years. "I remember those days too," Jake found himself saying, though he hadn't meant to speak. Rodriguez looked at him sharply, but Jake continued. "My grandmother used to cross the border to shop. She said people were just people, no matter which side they lived on." The woman's eyes lit up when Jake spoke. "Yes, exactly. My mother, she remembered too. She say war make people forget that we are all human beings with same hopes and fears." As she spoke, the woman moved into a patch of sunlight, and Jake got his first really clear look at her face. His heart nearly stopped. Those eyes, that nose. The way she tilted her head slightly when she talked. He knew exactly where he had seen her before. It was Aina from the coffee shop near the old border crossing. Aina, who used to serve him coffee and pastries when he was in high school, when crossing the border for a good meal was just a fun adventure with friends. Anna, who had always smiled at him and asked about his studies. Anna, who had once helped him with his homework when he was struggling with history, but that was impossible. Aina would be older now, probably married with children. And she had lived in the city, not out here in this rural area. Jake shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. The stress was making him see things that weren't there, but the woman was looking at him strangely too, like she was trying to remember something. She took another step closer, and Jake could see a small scar above her right eyebrow that he remembered from years ago. Aina had gotten that scar when she fell off her bicycle as a child. She had told him the story one day, when the coffee shop was quiet. "Jake?" the woman said softly, and his whole world tilted sideways. "Jake Peterson?" Rodriguez and Tom both looked at Jake in confusion. How did this enemy civilian know Jake's name? Jake felt like he couldn't breathe properly. It really was Ana Martinez, who had served him coffee and kindness when he was just a teenager figuring out life. Ana? Jake whispered, lowering his rifle slightly. Is that really you? Oh my God, it is you, Ana said, and fresh tears started running down her face. But these weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of recognition, of relief, of seeing a friendly face in a world that had become so dangerous. Rodriguez stepped forward, his rifle still ready. Soldier, how do you know this person? His voice was sharp and professional. Jake knew he was in trouble. Fraternizing with civilians from the other side was against regulations, even if those relationships had existed before the war. She used to work at the coffee shop near the old crossing, Jake said, his voice sounding strange in his own ears. Before the borders closed, she's not a threat, Rodriguez. She's just someone I knew when we were kids. Ana was looking at Jake like he was a miracle. I cannot believe it is you. When border closed, I always wonder what happened to nice boy who loved my grandmother's apple pastries. You always so polite, always say please and thank you. Jake remembered those pastries. Ana's grandmother made them in the back of the coffee shop, and they were the best thing Jake had ever tasted. He used to save his allowance money just to buy one on weekends. Ana would sometimes give him an extra one for free when her grandmother wasn't looking. Your hair is different, Ana said with a sad smile. And you look older, but your eyes, they still kind eyes. I recognize them right away when you speak. Tom was looking back and forth between Jake and Ana like he was watching a movie. This is crazy, he muttered. What are the chances? Rodriguez was less impressed. The chances don't matter. She's still an illegal border crosser and we still have a job to do. But Jake could hear uncertainty in his team leader's voice too. Ana seemed to understand that she was still in danger. Jake, please, I know this is a strange situation. I know you have duty to your country. But my mother, she is really dying. The doctor in our village, he says she have maybe 1 day left without proper medicine. Jake felt torn in half. On one side was his duty, his oath, his responsibility to his team and his country. On the other side was Ana, someone who had shown him kindness when he was young, someone who was asking for help to save her mother's life. What medicine does she need? Jake asked, though he wasn't sure why that mattered. Ana pulled out the prescription again, more hopefully this time. It's called penicillin, also insulin. She have infection and diabetes, but we cannot find these medicines in our area anymore. Jake knew both of those medicines. They were common on his side of the border, available at any pharmacy. But on Ana's side, medical supplies had become scarce because of the war. Jake stared at the prescription in Ana's trembling hand. The paper looked official, with a doctor's stamp and signature, but it was written in Ana's language. He couldn't read most of it, but he could make out the words penicillin and insulin written in English at the bottom. Rodriguez, Jake said quietly, maybe we should hear her out completely before we make any decisions. His team leader gave him a hard look, the kind that said Jake was walking on thin ice. But Rodriguez didn't say no, which Jake took as permission. To continue. Ana seemed to understand that this was her chance to explain everything. She took a deep breath and began to speak more slowly, choosing her English words carefully. My mother, her name is Rosa Martinez. Maybe you remember her from coffee shop? She is small woman with gray hair, always wear blue apron. Jake did remember her. Ana's mother had worked in the kitchen, making the pastries and soups that made the coffee shop famous. She had always waved at Jake through the kitchen window when he came in. Once, when Jake had been sick with a cold, she had made him a special soup and refused to let him pay for it. She helped me with my homework sometimes, Jake said softly. When the coffee shop was quiet, she would sit with me and help me practice my math. Ana's face brightened for a moment. Yes, she always liked to help children learn. That is why she works so hard to keep coffee shop open, so young people have safe place to study and meet friends. Rodriguez was listening but kept checking his watch. Jake knew that backup would arrive soon, and once that happened, the decision would be out of their hands. Standard procedure would take over, and Aina would be arrested as an illegal border crosser. "Tell us exactly what happened," Jake said. "Start from the beginning." Aina nodded and began her story. 3 weeks ago, my mother started feeling very sick. First just tired, then fever, then she cannot eat anything. I take her to doctor in our village, but he not have good equipment like before war. Jake could imagine how difficult medical care had become on Aina's side. Before the conflict started, people could travel freely to get the best medical care available. Now, each side was cut off from the resources of the other. Doctors say she have bad infection in her blood, and also her diabetes is getting worse. He give her medicine he have, but it not strong enough. She gets sicker every day. Aina's voice was getting quieter, like she was running out of strength to tell the story. Tom was still positioned behind the wall, but Jake could see he was listening intently. Even Rodriguez seemed focused on Aina's words, though he kept his rifle ready. Doctor tell me she need penicillin and insulin, but these medicines, they not available in our area anymore. Pharmacy is empty, hospital is empty. I ask everyone, but nobody have what she need. Jake felt a knot forming in his stomach. Those medicines were common on his side of the border. Any pharmacy would have them in stock. It seemed cruel that Aina's mother could die from something so easily treatable, just because she lived on the wrong side of an imaginary line. I try to find someone to help me get medicines legally, Aina continued. I go to government office, I fill out papers, I wait in lines for hours. But they tell me it take weeks to get permission, maybe months. My mother not have weeks. Rodriguez spoke for the first time in several minutes. So you decided to cross illegally. Aina looked down at the ground. I know it was wrong. I know it is dangerous, but what else I can do? Let my mother die when medicine is so close. Jake thought about what he would do if his own mother was dying and he could save her by crossing a border. He knew the answer immediately, and it scared him because it meant he understood exactly why Aina was here. I wait for 3 days watching. Patrol schedules, trying to find safe time to cross. I not eat much because I need to save money for medicines. I sleep in abandoned building near border, always listening for sound of soldiers. The image of Aina spending 3 days alone in a ruined building, hungry and scared but determined to save her mother, made Jake's chest ache. He remembered her as a cheerful teenager who always had a smile for everyone. War had changed her, just like it had changed him. This morning I see patrol go by and think maybe I have chance. I run to house where I hide yesterday, but then I hear you coming back. I get scared and try to hide, but my mother, she call out for me because she is in pain. Jake realized that the movement they had seen in the house was probably Anna's mother, too weak to understand the danger but needing her daughter's help. Can we see her? Jake asked suddenly. Rodriguez gave him another sharp look, but Jake continued. I mean, if her mother is really there and really sick, we should verify that, right? Aina's eyes filled with hope. Yes, please. You can see I tell truth. She is in back room of house. She cannot walk, cannot even sit up by herself. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, thinking. Jake could see the conflict in his team leader's face. Following protocol meant detaining Aina immediately and calling for transport. But if Aina was telling the truth, there was a dying woman in that house who had once been kind to Jake. This is highly irregular, Rodriguez said finally. But I suppose we need to secure the building anyway. It wasn't exactly permission, but it wasn't a refusal either. Aina understood immediately. Thank you so much. She is very weak, so please do not be frightened by how she looks. Jake lowered his rifle completely and took a step toward the house. Rodriguez made a disapproving sound but didn't order him to stop. Tom came out from behind the wall, looking nervous but curious. As they approached the front door, Jake could smell something that reminded him of the coffee shop from years ago. It was faint, but it was definitely the scent of cinnamon and vanilla that had always filled Aina's family's business. The inside of the house was dim and cluttered with belongings that looked like they had been packed hastily. There were suitcases and boxes everywhere, as if someone had been preparing to leave but hadn't finished. Ana led them toward the back of the house, past a kitchen where Jake could see empty medicine bottles on the counter. The labels were in Ana's language, but he could tell they were the kind of basic pain relievers that wouldn't help with serious illness. "Mama," Ana called softly as they approached a bedroom door, "I bring some people to help us." Jake heard a weak voice respond from inside the room. Even speaking Ana's language, the voice sounded exactly like he remembered Ana's mother sounding, gentle and tired, but still warm. When Ana opened the bedroom door, Jake's heart sank. The woman lying on the small bed was definitely Ina's mother, but she looked like she had aged 20 years in the 5 years since Jake had last seen her. Her face was pale and thin, and her breathing was shallow and difficult. She looked up at Jake with eyes that still held a spark of recognition, even though she was clearly very ill. "Jake?" she whispered in English. "Little Jake who loved my apple pastries?" Jake felt tears starting in his eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Martinez, it's me." She smiled weakly. "You grew up to be a handsome young man. Your grandmother, she would be proud." Rodriguez stepped forward and examined the medicine bottles on the bedside table. His expression was serious as he read the labels. "These are just basic antibiotics and pain relievers. Nothing strong enough for what she needs." Ana knelt beside her mother's bed and took her hand. "Mama, I'm going to get you real medicine. These nice soldiers, they going to help us." But Jake saw Rodriguez shake his head slightly. They both knew that helping Ana get medicine would mean breaking every rule they had sworn to follow. Jake stood in the small bedroom, watching Ana's mother struggle to breathe. Mrs. Martinez looked so fragile lying there. Nothing like the strong woman who used to carry heavy trays of pastries and always had energy to help customers. Her skin had a yellowish color that Jake knew meant she was very sick indeed. Rodriguez was studying the medicine bottles more carefully now, reading the labels with a frown. Jake could tell his team leader was starting to understand that Ana had been telling the truth. This wasn't some elaborate trick or trap. It was just a daughter trying to save her mother's life. Tom was standing by the window, keeping watch for their backup team that would arrive any minute. Jake knew that once Lieutenant Hayes showed up with reinforcements, any chance of helping Ana would disappear completely. Hayes was known for following rules exactly, no matter what the situation. "How long has she been this sick?" Rodriguez asked Ana quietly. 3 weeks getting worse, but she not well for 2 months, Ana replied, gently wiping her mother's forehead with a damp cloth. "Doctors say if she get proper medicine soon she will recover. But without it ... Ana didn't finish the sentence. But everyone in the room understood. Mrs. Martinez opened her eyes and looked directly at Jake. When she spoke, her voice was so weak he had to lean closer to hear her. "Jake, you remember when you failed your history test and cry in coffee shop?" Jake did remember. He had been 16 and worried about disappointing his mother. Mrs. Martinez had sat with him for over an hour, helping him understand the material and making him feel better about himself. "You tell me then that you want to be good person who help others," she continued slowly. "I see in your eyes you still same kind boy, just in different clothes now." Jake felt like someone had hit him in the chest. How could he look at this woman who had been kind to him and just walk away? But how could he risk his career, his team's safety, and his own future by helping her? Rodriguez must have seen the conflict on Jake's face because he pulled him aside. "Listen, Jake, I understand this is personal for you. But we have orders. And we have responsibilities to our unit and our country." "I know," Jake said, but his voice didn't sound convincing even to himself. "Hayes will be here in less than 5 minutes, Rodriguez continued. "When he arrives, this situation is out of our hands. Standard procedure takes over and Ana gets processed as an illegal border crosser." Jake looked back at Ana, who was holding her mother's hand and whispering something in their language, probably telling her that everything would be okay. Even though Ana must have known it probably wouldn't be, Tom's voice came from the window. "Vehicle approaching. Looks like our backup." Jake's heart started racing. He had maybe 3 minutes to make a decision that would change everything. He could follow orders, do his duty, and live with knowing he let Mrs. Martinez die. Or he could risk everything to help someone who had once helped him. Rodriguez, Jake said quickly. What if we don't mention Ana to Hayes? What if we just report that we searched the house and found it empty? Rodriguez stared at Jake like he had lost his mind. Are you suggesting we lie to a superior officer? I'm suggesting we give a sick woman a chance to live, Jake replied. The medicines she needs cost maybe $20 at any pharmacy on our side. $20 could save her life? And if we get caught helping her, it could end our careers and land us in military prison. Rodriguez said firmly. Tom had left his position by the window and was listening to their conversation. What if we found a way to help without officially helping? He suggested quietly. Both Jake and Rodriguez looked at him in surprise. Tom was usually the one who worried most about following rules. I mean, Tom continued, what if Ana just happened to find some medicine that someone accidentally dropped near the border fence later tonight? We wouldn't have to be involved directly. Jake felt a spark of hope. It was still risky, but it might work. I have a friend who works at the pharmacy in town. I could buy the medicines with my own money, no questions asked. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Jake could hear the sound of vehicles getting closer outside. Time was running out fast. This is crazy, Rodriguez said finally. But I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never had to watch someone die when I could have prevented it. Ana must have sensed that something important was happening because she looked up from her mother's bedside. What you decide? She asked Jake directly. We're going to help you, Jake said, and he felt like a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. But you have to trust us and do exactly what we say. Ana's eyes filled with tears of relief. Thank you. Thank you. So much. I will do anything you say. Rodriguez was already moving toward the front of the house. Hayes is here. Ana, you need to hide in the back room and stay completely quiet no matter what you hear. We'll tell him we found the house empty, but we're going to search it thoroughly to be sure. Jake helped Ana move her mother to a closet where they would be less likely to be discovered. Mrs. Martinez was so weak she could barely whisper, but she managed to squeeze Jake's hand and mouth the words, "Thank you." The next hour was the longest of Jake's life. Lieutenant Hayes arrived with 4 additional soldiers and wanted to search every building in the area. Jake and his team had to act completely normal while knowing that Ana and her mother were hiding just rooms away from where Hayes was giving orders. At one point, Hayes asked Jake directly if they had encountered anyone during their patrol. Jake looked his superior officer in the eye and said, "No, sir. The whole area appears to be abandoned." It was the first time Jake had ever lied to a commanding officer, and his hands were shaking as he said it. Finally, after what felt like hours, Hayes decided the area was secure and ordered everyone back to base. Jake, Rodriguez, and Tom were assigned to stay behind for another 2 hours to continue monitoring the location. As soon as the other soldiers were gone, Jake rushed back to the house. Ana and her mother were still hidden in the closet, and Mrs. Martinez was even weaker than before. I'm going to town to get the medicines, Jake told Ana. Rodriguez and Tom will stay here with you. I'll be back before sunset. The drive to town took 45 minutes, and Jake used the time to think about what he was doing. He was risking his military career, possibly facing court-martial, all for someone he hadn't seen in 5 years. But every time he started to have doubts, he remembered Mrs. Martinez helping him with his homework and making him soup when he was sick. At the pharmacy, Jake's friend David was working the evening shift. Jake had gone to school with David, and they had stayed friends even after Jake joined the military. I need penicillin and insulin, Jake said without explaining why. David raised an eyebrow. You sick, Jake? You should probably see a doctor first. It's not for me, Jake said. I can't explain everything, but someone really needs these medicines and can't get them any other way. David studied Jake's face for a moment, then nodded. How much do you need? Jake showed him Ana's prescription, and David gathered the medicines without asking any more questions. That'll be $38, he said. Jake paid with his own money. Money he had been saving to buy his mother a birthday present. As he drove back toward the border, Jake felt scared but also more sure of himself than he had in months. When he got back to the house, Aina was waiting by the door. She took the medicines like they were made of gold, tears streaming down her face. "How can I ever repay you?" she asked. "Just take care of your mother," Jake replied. "And maybe someday, when this war is over, we can have coffee again like we used to," Aina nodded. "I will never forget what you do for us today. Never." 3 months later, Jake received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo of Mrs. Martinez sitting in her garden, looking healthy and strong. On the back, Aina had written, "She is completely better now. Thank you for reminding me that good people still exist in this world." And Jake kept that photo in his wallet, and sometimes when his job felt too hard or the world seemed too cruel, he would look at it and remember that sometimes doing the right thing mattered more than following the rules.